Purdue announced the creation of the Center for C-SPAN Research and Engagement. The archive will continue doing what it does, recording, indexing, distributing the content, but Purdue will take a renewed interest in the research, the teaching, and getting students involved in understanding the archive and understanding Washington politics. It's a great blend of what C-SPAN does and what the university is so strong at, which is research and teaching and engagement.
From Purdue University, the Lamb School of Communications Center for C-SPAN Scholarship and Engagement welcomes you to a conversation between C-SPAN founder Brian Lamb and Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief of USA Today.
Good evening. I hope you enjoyed the opening video produced by Lamb School students Liam Archer, Riley Christian, and Andrew Procht. I'm Mary Fran Mattson, professor and head of the Brian Lamb School of Communication. Welcome to the inaugural Center for C-SPAN conversation with Susan Page of USA Today and Brian Lamb, alum of Purdue, namesake of our school, and the founder of C-SPAN. To say the least, it's a tumultuous and interesting time in Washington, D.C. And sometimes, being here in the Midwest, we may feel far away from the rancor and those trying to report on it and address it, but thanks to Susan Page and Brian Lamb joining us this evening, it may all feel a little closer to home tonight. Thank you all for being here. It was back in the fall of 2017 when we announced the launch of the Center for C-SPAN Scholarship and Engagement. We were also celebrating the 30th anniversary of the C-SPAN Archives, which is located adjacent to Purdue. Perhaps some of you were at that event as well. We've come a long way since the idea of a Center for C-SPAN Scholarship of Engagement emerged. We now refer to it by its acronym, CCSE. I'd like to express appreciation to all who supported the idea, including President Daniels, Purdue's Office of Research and Partnerships, the Justin S. Morrill Dean of the College of Liberal Arts, Dr. David Reingold, who is here with us tonight. David, where are you? Ah, there he is. Thank you, David. My fellow head and wonderful, supportive colleague, Rosie Clausen of the Department of Political Science, the CCSE Advisory Committee of Faculty from the Lamb School and the Department of Political Science, my faculty, staff, and student colleagues in the Lamb School and all around the College of Liberal Arts. And I'd like to say a special thank you to the managing director of the CCSE, Connie Debley. Connie took a huge leap and a long drive from Virginia to join Purdue and bring with her 25 years of experience as a producer at C-SPAN. Thank you, Connie. Among the initiatives of the CCSE are the Center for C-SPAN Conversations, which are designed to engage Purdue and the greater community about political communication. You're involved in the inaugural Center for C-SPAN Conversation tonight. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Robert Browning, the faculty director of the CCSE, a joint appointed faculty member of the Department of Political Science and the Lamb School, and the director of the C-SPAN Archives. Robert will tell you a little bit more about the Center for C-SPAN Scholarship and Engagement and our guests for this Center for C-SPAN conversation. Robert?
Thank you so much. Welcome, all of you. It's great to see such a large turnout tonight. And it's a pleasure to welcome you to this first event of the Center for C-SPAN Scholarship and Engagement. We're excited about the center, which is going to expand the knowledge and the use of the C-SPAN archives on the campus. The archives is a tremendous resource, 235,000 hours of digital content, one of the largest collections in the United States and one of the most accessible collections. But as your brochure will tell you a little bit more about the center, what it's going to do is to help faculty and students use the collection for their teaching and research. And Mayor Franz already introduced Connie, but if you're a faculty member here and you've ever thought about using the C-SPAN archives and you didn't know how to start, Connie's your person in that role to be your hand holder. And she's met with a lot of faculty in the very short time she's been here. In the same way, if you're a student and you're interested in internships in Washington, you've heard in the past about a Maymester program in Washington where you get to meet elected officials and learn how Washington works. That's what the center, some of the programs that the center is going to carry on. I'd also like to thank a few more people who helped this event get started tonight. Donna Wireman of the Communications School, the Lamb School, helped with all the details and making sure things worked well. J.D. Arland, Bernadette Fannin, and Emily Jones were manning the tables. J.D.'s a little bit under the weather, so we gave him the night off. And you saw Doug Osmond's students' video. And so our two guests today hardly need an introduction, so they're not going to get one. Actually, we're going to have a video introduction. As at the archives, we say it was video, but Brian Lamb went to school here and performed on this stage. And and he, both as a student and as an adult. Well, his adult performances are more of the type that we see on C-SPAN. And he's here to interview our special guest, Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief of the USA Today. They bring with them lots of experience, knowledge, and insights into Washington, and Brian will tease some of those out in his inimitable way of asking questions. So I'd like you to welcome them, but first let's watch a video that Connie Debley put together, and it shows a little bit of it's all from the archives, and it shows through the years this kind of the interviews that have taken place on C-SPAN with Susan Page.
Our guest for the last 45 minutes has been Susan Page.
Susan Page is originally from Wichita, Kansas. She has a master's from Columbia University and an undergraduate degree from Northwestern. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Go ahead, please.
Would you like Pat Buchanan to have the primetime speech that he wants to have at the Republican convention in August?
Susan, I'll be honest with you. I haven't focused on that at all.
What's it feel like when the president looks out in the crowd and says, Susan?
Well, you know, I guess it's nice, although I think it's not important. It's nice, but it's not. It's important not to take it too important.
So do you think his primary challenge was damaging to you or helpful or what?
Well, I can't say it was particularly helpful. Maybe I'm a little stronger for it. Maybe I'm a little better, be a little better candidate when it comes to the fall.
Yes.
Mr. President, on another topic, you've laid out some of the criteria you're going to use to choose the next Supreme Court justice. Does Governor Mario Cuomo fit that criteria, and do you think that he would make a good Supreme Court justice?
Both of you have been here before. The main reason you're here together is that you're man and wife.
Maybe only journalists can put up with other journalists.
And then we started dating after we found ourselves sitting next to each other at President Reagan's inaugural. And just to keep it bipartisan, we broke up at one point, and then we got back together after we went to a breakfast for Mo Udall.
If one of us is working on a story the other might be interested in, I think we proceed with some good faith and we don't try to steal stories from one another.
What made you come in this morning at 3 o'clock in the morning to be with us?
Well, you know, it's the C-SPAN mug collection that we
Yeah, this is a new one.
I'm only going to speak for 3 minutes. I work for USA Today. We know how to write tight.
Susan, I'm pleased and honored to give you the award, and I guess they've given you
The check already.
check already.
And I wonder if one of the effects of this period may be that people look at the two major party candidates and say, you know, is this all there is? Are these the only choices I have?
A perfect record of attending 8 dinners as president. We're also delighted that it was possible for Mrs. Clinton to be with us tonight.
We've never had a first lady who had her own career. This is different, and not everybody in the country is comfortable with that, whether they should be or not.
Women. And thirdly, Susan, if Dukakis is running such a stupid campaign, he chose the stupid people that are running it. I mean, what does that say about his judgment?
Thank you, Pacific Palisades.
I think that's a good point.
And I think Miss Susan there should be ashamed of herself.
I have to take issue with you on one subject.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Susan Page of USA Today, sitting in for Diane Rehm.
And it is a confusing situation.
I am so excited about this election.
I would like to come out in favor of leaks. I'm for them. I take them wherever I can get them.
Naples, Florida, for Susan Page. Go ahead, please. For Susan Page, we go to Long Island again. Good morning.
I do feel, as the only member of the White House press corps here, a little like a big old turkey that's been invited by Tom Rosenstiel over to his house for Thanksgiving. I see carving knives all around me.
Election nights are humbling things, I think, for people who cover politics. You reported $6.5 million cash on hand, but a debt of $6.2 million. So you basically broke? How does anything change?
That's one reason you get so aggravated with the politicians. One day you're great, and the next day you're a dog.
There is no one who has been in more rival camps in Washington. She can appear on Fox Network one night and MSNBC the next and never quite give it away. I have no idea, after knowing this woman for 35 years, what her politics are. So let's get started first, and we're going to go to the audience.
Okay, first, let's get started by me saying that
it's my interview.
I'm sorry. If I had known you were going to show my hairstyles through the decades, I might not have come here at all.
Nobody cares about anything but the brain.
Yeah. That's not been my experience after being on TV. Like when my mother-in-law called me after I'd been on TV and said, "I saw you on TV, what's wrong with your hair?"
I can remember 25 years ago, my mother called me one day and she said, "You know that gray suit you're wearing?" Because she had seen the morning show. She literally said, "Lose it." And I haven't worn a gray suit for 25 years. So.
You should listen to your mother. Yeah.
Susan, tell us, let's start with your early days. You went to Northwestern, you went to Columbia. Why did you want to be a journalist?
So I must be the luckiest person in the world, because when I left for college, I decided I was interested in journalism, and I've never, ever wanted to do anything else since then. I was telling actually some of the students from Purdue that this has made me a terrible negotiator for salaries, because I'll always take the job and basically pay them to let me do it. So for the people who heard me tell this story at the door, excuse me, but my first job was at Newsday. I was so glad to get a job at a great newspaper like that out of school. And my first day on the job, Human Resources called me and said, "We're going through your paperwork. We can't see what we're supposed to pay you." And I said, quote, "You know, it never came up." And I would say that you lose some of your leverage to negotiate for a salary once you've actually started on the job. That's been my experience.
So should I wait a little longer, or should I just get it on the record right now?
What
do you think of our president?
Oh. You know, this has been such an interesting time to be a journalist. It's been so
unexpected. One of the clips there, I was saying that election nights are humbling things. That's been true many times, but it was never been more true than it was in 2016, where I myself and I think others misread the mood of the country, did not expect the result that we had. And since then, we've had a president who is different from previous presidents. I've covered 6 presidents. I've covered presidents starting with President Reagan. And this president operates in a different way. He handles staff in a different way. He's just different. And some of that difference is why he got elected. I think there are a lot of Americans who like the brashness and the willingness to do what's seen as politically unacceptable and to speak his mind, because he certainly speaks his mind. And there are other Americans that feel that he's put the country in peril. And so there's, I've covered these big stories. I've covered an assassination attempt against President Reagan and the impeachment trial of President Clinton and the first Gulf War with President George H.W. Bush. But I do feel that this is the biggest story I've ever covered. And I think that partly because I feel our country pulling apart. And that distresses me a lot. And I think as a journalist, I have a responsibility to try to figure out what's going on and to help if possible.
I really want to get an insight from you on how do you go in. I mean, I watch all the television news networks. I watch Fox.
Do you like TV? Yeah.
Do I like TV?
Yeah.
I like radio, if you want to know the truth.
Yeah.
I love radio. Yeah. I started in this town in radio. I love it. I still do. It's still my favorite medium, believe it or not. We have a radio station, as you know. You've been on our
C-SPAN radio.
Yeah.
I was on it last week.
Yeah.
And in fact, I fell over the stairs when I was coming out of the C-SPAN studio, and I'm considering suing Brian because I'm telling you, I did like a pratfall, like I was Lucille Ball. It was really something. And then they sent me Steve Scully, who's the person who interviewed me and who failed to break my fall. Then sent me a picture that showed this big black and yellow tape they've now put on the step I fell down. So I wish there was like a little plaque beside it memorializing the tape.
As I was saying, in all seriousness, if I turn on Fox News and watch it, and then I turn on CNN or MSNBC, they're two different planets. I mean, it's not just that they are for or against, they're just talking about two different worlds. What's it like? Because you do CNN?
Oh, sure.
And you do MSNBC.
I was on CNN yesterday.
Yeah.
I'm a little hurt that you didn't see me on CNN yesterday. But,
what time was it?
It was 9 o'clock in the morning.
It's too late for me. I get up at 4.
Yeah.
All right. What are you seeing inside these different organizations, and how can you go to all of them and still survive? Because it's a tough world out there now.
So, I'm not a commentator. I'm more of a reporter and an analyst in a way. So I go on Fox and say what I think about things, and I get all this hate Twitter from people who think I'm really liberal. And then I go on MSNBC and I say exactly the same things I said on Fox, and I get all this hate Twitter from people who say I'm very conservative. And after MSNBC, they say I love Trump, and after Fox, they say I hate Trump. And I've said the same thing on both channels because they are different. They are really different versions of the truth. Now, let me ask the audience a question. Now, I'm not going to ask you what you watch, but when you think of, if you watch cable TV, do you watch only one of them, or do you mix them up? So how many people watch most of the time just one particular cable station? And how many people mix it up with a lot of them? So you're obviously a really smart crowd because a lot of you say you watch other things. But
how many people watch C-SPAN? That's more important.
How many people watch C-SPAN?
Hey, come on.
But
we need the viewers.
I think in general, people tend to watch one of them and believe what it is they're seeing. And on some of the shows are pretty newsy, like the show I do on Fox and like to do is Bret Baier's show, Special Report. I think he's a good reporter and an honest guy. And I like doing Meet the Press Daily on MSNBC. I also think that's a pretty good show. You can get news from those shows, but if you watch it all day, you're really getting a picture of the world that is pretty pretty narrow, I think. And I think one of the things that's happened in the country is people are getting news from places that agree with them, that have their worldview, and I think it's important that we not do that, as many of you said when you raised your hands.
I lived through Richard Nixon. I've been there in Washington for a very long time.
You're quite a bit older than I am.
Quite a bit, yes. Yeah. I am. But here's what I've never quite seen before. I've never seen on television, and for that matter in some newspapers, I've never seen the partisanship or the anti. I mean, I ran into a reporter in the airport today. I had a few hours in the airport. 2 planes were canceled. And I couldn't believe how strongly she expressed her hate for Donald Trump. So what's happened? Why are these networks being so one-sided?
Well, part of it's the business model, right? Fox is the most successful cable station. It has a very strong point of view. That's one of, I think, it has served MSNBC's commercial interest to become the kind of liberal alternative to Fox, although they have shows that are news shows, but they also have opinion shows. So I think the market has helped that. And it's also it's both a symptom and a cause of the division in our country, right? I think it pulls us apart and makes us think less of one another if we watching news like that. But the fact that people feel so partisan now has encouraged the cable networks to do that as well.
First president you covered.
So came to Washington in 1980 and covered the campaign. So I covered, I did like a little bit of campaign travel with Jimmy Carter, but the first president where I worked at the White House and came to the White House briefing and did all that was Ronald Reagan.
Don't need a long answer, but just give.
Is that a hint that I've been talking too
long?
No. Please stop talking so long? Is that what you're saying?
Because I want to take you through all your presidents.
Because that is not the C-SPAN way.
Yeah, it's... I haven't seen Susan in a long time. What comes to mind when you think of Ronald Reagan from your covering the White House, not whether you like him or dislike him?
So it's hard for me to say what I thought then, because then I was mostly just really stupid and trying not to look as stupid as I was, because you start covering the White House, you're kind of overwhelmed. You're expected to cover Nancy Reagan's dress controversy one day and nuclear arms control the next. So it takes you a while to kind of find your footing at the White House. But the thing about Ronald Reagan was his ability to connect with his audience and connect with voters. I mean, it was really remarkable. He was once asked, how can you be an actor and be president? And he said, how can you be president if you're not an actor? And he never thought that would be a slur. He didn't think being an actor was a slur. He thought it gave him the ability to tell people what he was thinking in a compelling way and make a connection with them. He'd give the same speech over and over again, as all politicians do, and you'd be listening to it like the 15th time, and you'd still be caught up in the story that he tells, because he would tell it in such a good way. And I think that was part of the reason he was able to connect with the nation and move the nation. He definitely changed the course of the nation. He made it a more conservative country.
Why have you decided to write a book on George Herbert Walker Bush's wife?
So this is a news flash. I'm working on a book on Barbara Bush. I'm doing it, I covered the Bushes. I think Barbara Bush was the person I've covered who was least like her public persona. In that, especially when I was covering her public persona, was what a sweet grandmother, and she is a very devoted grandmother, but she's also smart and tough. She could be mean. She weighed in on the things she cared about. She had a complicated life with the kind of heartbreak that she had a difficult relationship with her mother. She lost a daughter to leukemia. She's had divorces in her families and she's had an incredibly full life that has spanned the changes for women in our country. Barbara Bush was born 5 years after women got the vote, and she's still alive now to see one of her sons try to run against the first woman who was nominated for president. So I think she's interesting, and I think there's a lot of things people don't know about her, and I certainly hope you'll buy the book.
When's it coming out?
It's coming out next spring. This assumes that I can stop doing events like this one and focus on writing them. And the only reason between Donald Trump and Barbara Bush, my days are full. There are not many people who can say that. And the only reason that I agreed to come out and speak to this wonderful crowd at this beautiful campus was because it was for Brian Lamb, for whom I have so much respect. So.
How open is Mrs. Bush to talking with you for this book?
So I did.
You just called her mean. You said she was
but
mean.
I said she was also a nice grandmother.
Okay.
Yeah. You're kind of mean.
Sorry about the fact you tripped. I hope you're okay.
Really, if there had been video of this, it would have gone viral on YouTube. I'm telling you. So I made this. I debated with myself how to approach Mrs. Bush, and I was afraid that if I went to her before I got a book contract and asked her if she'd cooperate, she'd say no, and then I didn't know what I would do. But I was worried if I went and asked her beforehand if she would cooperate and she said yes, that she might think she had some control over what I wrote, which I didn't want either. So I took a leap of faith and signed a book contract, and then wrote Mrs. Bush and said, I'm going to write this book about you, and I would be so grateful if you would talk to me. And so she agreed to talk to me once. So I went to Houston, I interviewed her. It was a great interview, fantastic. She was so candid and terrific. And at the end of the interview, I said, can I talk to you again? And she said yes. So I've now made 5 trips to Houston to interview her 5 times. I've got a 6th trip at the end of this month. So she has been incredible. We didn't have an arrangement beforehand. It's at the end of each interview I ask if I can come back again. But she's been willing to do that, for which I'm really grateful.
How old is she now?
She's 92, and her husband is 93. It's a privilege to see them.
Bill Clinton.
See, this is an interviewer's trick. So he thinks that if he doesn't speak, I'll be embarrassed by this silence between us, and I'll jump in with some fantastic secret Bill Clinton story. But I've done that trick.
Hillary Clinton. Did you learn anything covering Bill Clinton? How's that? Or what did you learn?
Yeah. With Bill Clinton, you learned the value of resilience, right? Because he would be riding high, and then he would do something so stupid and be in a catastrophic situation, and then he would build himself back up. I mean, he was like, he was, those inflatable dolls that you find? He's like that. I mean, you can't keep him down, and his wounds are many of them self-inflicted, but he never gave up, and that was, Bill Clinton's like a life lesson in that. I mean, you think about Gary Hart, who was the front runner for the Democratic nomination, and had the monkey business scandal, those of you of a certain age will remember, and suspended his campaign, and basically his political life was over. And Bill Clinton ran and got into the Jennifer Flowers scandal, which, again, those of you of a certain age will remember. And he didn't give up, and he didn't pull out, and he got the nomination, and he won the presidency twice. So I think Gary Hart is really angry about this. But you know.
As long as you mention Gary Hart and then the whole history of women in politics and all that, does it have an? I know it has an impact on the news media because they cover it gavel to gavel. But does it have an impact on the voter? Do you think?
What, sex scandals or?
Sex scandals, the Stormy Daniels stories. Does that matter to anybody?
You know, I think it matters a little bit on how why people are supporting you and who they think you are. So if Stormy Daniels said she had an affair with Barack Obama, we would be shocked, right? And I think it would probably be harmful to Barack Obama because that's not who we think Barack Obama is. But for Stormy Daniels to say she had an affair with Donald Trump, that is, people did not vote for Donald Trump because they thought he was a paragon of virtue who had never cheated on his wife, right? So I'm not sure that I think it has much effect for Donald Trump. I think it's not. I think if the most important thing to you was that someone not be guilty of infidelity, you were not voting for Donald Trump in the first place. Now, I think Stormy Daniels presents a different challenge for Trump, which is that her legal case may have all kinds of complications. And I just remember the Whitewater scandal, which led to a special counsel, which then got involved in, and then the Paula Jones case, and then the testimony on the Paula Jones case, and that was what led to Clinton's impeachment. So I think Stormy Daniels could be important in that way. But in terms of like voters saying, oh, I can't support Donald Trump because he cheated on his wife, I just don't think that's happening.
In Washington, there's this constant controversy on whether a president's going to come to one of your dinners.
Yeah, it's so important.
You were president of the White House Correspondents Association. You were president of the Gridiron Club. Why does the press, for instance, all the awards given this year at the White House dinner coming up in the end of April are all for journalists that have written anti-Trump stories. Yeah. And then everybody's spending all this time worrying about whether he's going to show or not. What difference does it make, and why do they spend so much time fussing over it?
So I think it's possibly a disincentive for President Trump to attend, that he would need to present these awards to people who have been investigating him. This came up also with President Clinton. President Clinton came to all of the dinners, as you saw in the clip, and at one point had to give an award to someone he quite detested, who had done some very critical stories involving his personal behavior. So that's happened before. I don't think the White House Correspondents Association is fussing about it this much this year. Some years, yes, but the association has invited the president, as the association always does. I think hopes the president will come. There's not a lot of lobbying going on for that. And the same for the Gridiron Dinner, which was in March, which President Trump did attend. It was the first of the press dinners he's come to. And we wanted him to come. It's not, then that stupid clip where I'm saying it's important, but it's not important, and I sound like, like I've been on drugs or something. But what I was trying to say is, of course it's nice to be called on at a presidential news conference, but don't think you're so important. What's important is the question you ask and the answer you get. There's one reason why I do, so I think you may overestimate how much frantic lobbying there's going on. There is one reason I think it makes some difference, and that is when you think about the Gridiron Club, which is the oldest association of journalists in Washington, every president since Grover Cleveland has come to the Gridiron Dinner and sat there and been made fun of. Because the whole shtick with the Gridiron Dinner is that we do these songs and skits that we think are hilarious, but if you're the target of them, possibly you don't think they're so funny. But the President of the United States comes and watches and sits there as journalists needle him on his greatest vulnerabilities. And then he stands up and makes a few jokes at our expense and then says, I know you've made fun of me and I've made fun of you, but journalism has a role in the American democracy. that cannot be underestimated, and I respect that. And to me, it was important that President Trump come and say that.
I'm looking at a political news story from the political publication, and Carl Bernstein is one of those that will be awarded, I think the Merriman Smith or one of these awards
Who's that?
for CNN, Carl Bernstein.
He's part of a group.
A group,
yes,
yeah. But I'm going to read this quote that if I were President Trump sitting there, Carl Bernstein has called Trump a demagogic authoritarian president and accused him of incessant, compulsive, continual lying. Why would a human being want to come sit next to somebody like that and watch him get an award for what he said about the human being?
Possibly he wouldn't want to, and maybe he won't come. Because he didn't come to the White House Correspondents' Dinner last year. It is the group of reporters who it's the association that represents the reporters who cover him every day. But then the kind of nature of the White House press corps has changed some because President Obama didn't use the press corps in quite the same way. He didn't give many interviews to reporters who were in the regular press corps. He preferred to talk to 60 Minutes and alternate, between two ferns. He didn't use the White House press corps in the same way that previous presidents had. And boy, Trump really has. And it's been more than a year since President Trump has had a standalone news conference, a news conference where he's not there with a foreign leader. We've never had that since the beginning of presidential news conferences, maybe with FDR. We've never had that happen before. But it's not as though we don't know what's going on through President Trump's mind, because you just have to look on Twitter to have an incredible insight into what he's thinking morning and night, which has prompted us, by the way, to require a reporter to start work at 6 a.m. for the morning tweets and to set up a news desk for late in the evening to watch for the evening tweets. So he's been kind of an employment project for journalists, which we're grateful for.
Headline in yesterday's Politico. Sorry, I'm not quoting from USA Today. Poll, 77% say major news outlets report fake news. I'm going to read the paragraph so you can see where I'm sure you read it.
I actually brought that with me.
Did you really?
I did the Monmouth poll.
Yeah.
Yeah, I brought it really. You think I didn't?
What do you have in a little tiny piece of paper in your?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Let me hear.
I got the results right here. I was shocked by them. So
more than it's an 800. Only 803 people were quizzed on this, but more than 3 in 4 of 803 American respondents, or 77%, say they believe that major traditional television and newspaper media outlets report, quote, fake news, according to a Monmouth University poll released Monday, marking a sharp increase in distrust of those news organizations from a year ago, when 63% registered concerns about the spread of misinformation.
So I pulled out the actual numbers because when I saw this, it came out yesterday or the day before. I thought this is really distressing. I thought the follow-up question was worse, though, because the question about does traditional news media publish fake news, some people in the follow-up question said it's because it's by accident. Now, how you do it by accident, I'm not quite sure, but I'm going to take a little comfort in that. But 42% said mainstream news organizations make up stories on purpose in order to push an agenda. And 42% of Americans believe that. I just find this, I'm just gobsmacked.
Why?
Because
why do you think 42% feel this way?
I don't know. I think part of it is, has been a long time coming and a deterioration of trust in mainstream news media. And I think part of it is the attacks that President Trump has made on mainstream news media as fake news, as news you can't trust. I don't have the crosstabs to know that, like you could look at, of the 42%, how many are Republicans or Democrats, you could look at it that way. I suspect that Republicans are more likely to feel that way than Democrats, but I don't actually know that. But this is, I've spent my whole life working in the mainstream news media, and I can tell you that the places I've worked do not make up stories in order to push an agenda. And the idea that our readers think that, I just find alarming as a journalist, and I find it alarming as an American. Because how can you believe what you read if you feel that way? And if we can't agree on kind of basic facts about what's happening on the southern border or what's happening in Syria or what's happening on healthcare, how can we ever make smart decisions about what to do about them? So that's why I cut this out, because I'm really distressed by it.
Want to open it up to questions. We have some students, although I must say this looks like a grand, glorious Purdue Lafayette audience right here. Some of you in the audience look like you might be as old as I am, which is heartwarming. That we're still here. What are you doing now?
I'm taking your picture.
It's outrageous.
Yeah.
Maybe you ought to do the same
Yeah,
thing.
you should.
Who has a let's question all the way in the back, sir.
I'm sorry, say again?
The New York Times began to snow. That was back around like 2012 or so. Headline on the newspaper. It said the end of snow.
Because of climate change, is that what? Yeah.
Who else? Who else has a question? Comment question. All the way to the back. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, go up to the mic so everybody in the room can hear you, please. There's a mic here and a mic there, and anybody that wants to get behind one of these, we'll call on you.
So, nice to meet you. I'm actually a Brian Lamb School of Communication student. Woo! And then,
do you guys call yourself Brians for short?
Oh, yeah, like we call like Brian Lamb as our guy, so, you know, like I'm one of part. And then I was in like multi-platform journalism class, and then yesterday we were talking about the very news, like it's a hot topic right now, that Sinclair broadcast group, they actually own the like 2/3 of countries like TV stations, and then they were saying exactly the same thing, like on every of their local TV. They like saying like we are not biased, you know, excuse me, we're like not biased to like media, we're saying like non-fake news as we are. And then, but like the thing is like journalists was doing like investigation to this like TV station that they're actually owned by like a person who has formerly like worked with Donald Trump before. So like people are saying this is definitely a future like propaganda tool for like president in the future. So I was just like want to know your opinion about this, because like most of the like states on this TV station, they're actually voting for Trump a lot. They've been called like Trump's country actually.
Susan, do you know Sinclair?
I do know Sinclair. It's the biggest group of TV stations across the country, and they want to merge with the Tribune broadcasting system, which will make them even bigger and more powerful. Yeah. They have a kind of a conservative point of view. Boris Epstein, who I got to know during it was a Trump surrogate. During the campaign, I got to know they hired him as a commentator. He does Washington commentary for them. The thing that makes Sinclair different from other broadcast groups is that they are exerting control over all their local stations in a way that in the way that the other broadcast networks are not doing. So that when Boris does commentary, they are required to run it. And all the Sinclair stations were required to read a statement. The local anchors read a statement that said they wanted to stand against fake news, which is something we all agree. But it was two things about it raised concerns. One is that it kind of attacked mainstream news sources as being untrustworthy. And the second was that they had all their anchors reading exactly the same statement. And I don't know if you saw the mashup which was, I thought, it seemed a little Orwellian to me. Yeah. So how many people, if you saw it, how many people thought that was of concern, like something that worried you a little? Did anybody think, no, this isn't of concern, the press is making something out of nothing? So, that's kind of how I felt too.
What's the difference, though? You take a Sinclair Broadcasting, you have 200 television stations in the country, which you couldn't do 50 years ago. Right. You're only allowed to own 7. But what's the difference between that and a CBS News going to 200 stations in the country in the network, and he had, in my time, Eric Severide got a minute and a half every night to tell me what I should think.
Well, he got that on the nightly news, but they didn't. CBS stations do not send commentary by John Dickerson and make them all play it. And the CBS stations do not send a script and make all the local anchors read it. That is something that the other places are not doing. So that's what makes it different. It's both that they've got a decidedly conservative slant, but it's also that they are enforcing that on local stations where, traditionally you'd have local stations that might be different from one another. Like, I grew up in Wichita. The local station in Wichita would be different from the local station on Long Island, which is where I had my first job. So the Sinclair has kind of broken that model.
Any other folks out there with questions, comments? Sir.
This, I believe, is nonpartisan, as difficult as it is for me to be that. I recently read a book called What Washington Gets Wrong. And it states there that the average senior bureaucrat, and that's the word used, has been there 26 years. That transcends both parties a number of times. How can that change? Because the premise of that book is that the senior bureaucrats and many who work with them have great disdain for the public and think that the public doesn't know anything at all about what they want, and those are the folks writing the rules and regulations to be passed through Congress. How can that change?
So thank you for your question. I haven't read the book. I don't know the book. I will say that there are people. We do have civil servants who work through administrations, right? And they're people in a whole range of jobs, including some jobs that are very important and that are important in regulatory affairs and scientific affairs. And my general experience with those kind of senior civil servants are that they are really serious people who care a lot about what they're working on. I worry a little about the kind of demonization of people who work for the government. This idea of a deep state that is really at odds with our democracy, because that in the 106 years I've been working in Washington, that has not been my experience. That's not to say there isn't anybody like that, but I think our tradition of a protected civil service is one of the kind of things that give stability to a democracy. It's one of many checks that make our democracy strong. So that would be my view, but I can't speak to the point of the book, which I don't know.
Yes, ma'am.
So prior to this event, there was a Facebook post promoting it, and it said that you would be discussing the state of the current president, midterm elections, and the state of journalism. And the comment that was left on it was somebody, a man said, just a couple of liberals coming to town to bash our president. With that, and that's not what the post said. So it seems without even knowing what you were going to discuss, he immediately jumped to a conclusion. Things are just so polarized. Do you see that changing? How do you respond to that?
When I go out to talk to folks, like on campaigns, or when I work on a lot of our polling. So at that point, I'll do callbacks to people that we've polled. And when I talk to people outside Washington in situations like that, people don't seem quite so polarized, right? You ask what they care about. Everybody cares about healthcare and education. People worry about school safety. There are issues that are pretty broadly shared by Americans. But there's something about our political system, and especially our political system in Washington, that's gotten to be kind of frozen in partisanship. And I think it was a long time developing, and I don't know how it gets changed. I mean, I think there are some things that would be helpful to do. I think nonpartisan redistricting would be helpful to make congressional districts make more sense. Well, that's happening some places. California passed a voter referendum that has forced nonpartisan districting. I think what's called jungle primaries are helpful. Jungle primaries mean that you don't run. Everybody runs in one primary, and the top two vote getters run in the runoff in the general election. And so if your district is mostly Republican, 2 Republicans will end up being the final 2 candidates. And if your district is mostly Democratic, 2 Democrats might. And the effect of that is that you don't necessarily always elect the person who is farthest out on the spectrum, right? Whereas now, if you're in a Republican district and you have a Republican and a Democratic candidate, you're going to elect the most conservative Republican you can because of the nature of the primary system. So there are things like that people are states and others are experimenting with that I think are helpful. But I'm not. But I don't know what's enough to kind of turn around this trend of really sharp partisanship, because it's made Washington not a very. It means Washington is not really serving your interest right now, because it is so hard for Washington to get things done and also to think in a long-term way instead of a short-term way about the problems that we face. I don't know. Maybe some of you have great ideas. Maybe Brian does. No.
Sarah.
Or not. Yeah.
Sir.
Hi. I've noticed, I sympathize with reporters trying to report on the White House, because I've noticed that often the president will tweet one thing and Sarah Huckabee Sanders will say another, and there will sort of be a third, like, unofficial comment from the administration and political or whatnot. So my question is, has your bureau developed any strategies for sort of sorting out what the real story is, or sorting out what the actual, headline should be?
Yeah. So one thing that we're doing more and more of, so one of the things with President Trump, this was actually also true with President Reagan. So after President Reagan's news conferences, we would almost always do a story about what he said that was wrong. I mean, I don't mean ideologically wrong, I mean factually incorrect. And this did not have any big effect on President Reagan's standing, but it was something we did after news conferences because he would say things that were wrong. And with President Trump, he says things that are factually inaccurate. For instance, yesterday he was tweeting about this caravan coming up from Central America, and they're trying to come over the border so they can take advantage of DACA. Well, in fact, you had to be here by 11 years ago to take advantage of DACA. So we think it's important to point that out, as we did with President Reagan. So we are increasingly doing, and over the past year and a half, have increasingly done the kind of fact-check kind of articles to try to provide some context and information when the president says things that we think are factually inaccurate. Some people, I think some supporters of the president see that as hostile coverage, and he may as well. I don't really think of it as hostile coverage. I think of it as the coverage that journalists are supposed to do. And I don't think Americans always care when a president says something that is factually inaccurate. But I think it's important for us to note that. And I can't remember your question and where I was going, so.
I was asking about if you have sort of 3 or 4 conflicting stories coming from, quote unquote, the White House.
Oh, yeah.
What are some strategies for sorting out what should actually go in the article?
Well, if we have people telling us different things, we try to have a story reflecting the fact that people are telling us different things. And sometimes there'll be some factual basis, like some document that you can pin something on, so you know who is telling you the truth. But if you don't, I think you have to be transparent with readers and say, 3 sources told us this, but the official White House statement was that. And then you try to cover it the next day when you have figured out maybe who was telling you the truth and who wasn't. I think one of the effects of, we try to limit the anonymous sources we use, but we sometimes use anonymous sources. But we've tried to become more transparent about use of anonymous sources. So we're more likely to say, according to 3 sources, all of whom have direct knowledge of the situation, but refuse to be identified because they're not authorized to do so, right? We try to give readers some clues to why they should or should not believe the anonymous sources we're using. That's one of the ways I think we're trying to rebuild the trust, some of the trust that's been lost in the work that we do.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you for your time tonight. Speaking of trust, I was wondering, how do you think public perception and trust compares between cable news and news organizations online?
And newspapers like USA
Yeah.
Today.
So I would like to believe that trust in mainstream sources like USA Today or CBS News is higher than online news outlets and cable TV. But I don't actually know if that's true or not. I mean, there's probably data that says whether it's true or not. I would like to think that's true. I think there is less tradition of trust in online news sources because online sources are newer. They don't have the long legacy that newspapers have, for instance. And also because online news sources, that puts a certain premium on being, smart or a smart ass or, funny or having a point of view. And I think that makes you more entertaining, but maybe less trustworthy.
Sir?
So if I could, is this on? If I could synthesize some of the things that you said, it seems as if we had, with Reagan, government by anecdote. That it wasn't government by fact, it was government by anecdote. We then had Fox News, which decided to be a successful organ. What it needed to do was to say, everybody else is lying, we're telling the truth, and then that allowed them, because everybody else is lying, just to lie. And the fundamental problem with President Trump is not what he's actually doing. I think it's incredible that he can be so incompetent at so many things in such a short period of time. What the problem is that we are fundamentally undermining the belief in the value of telling the truth. And I think that's the real problem and legacy beyond anything that actually happens in this country. What do you think of that scenario that I've just drawn out?
So I do think that one of the fundamental problems we have is that we don't agree on what is true, right? On what is actually happening. On whether the Affordable Care Act made healthcare costs go up or down. Did it succeed in what it was supposed to do, or did it fail? It's like people believe whatever the analysis is from the sources that they trust, which are sometimes partisan ones. So I think it is necessary for democracy to have respect for the truth and to also be able to come to some kind of agreement on what is the truth. And I think that's one of the corrosive things that's happened here that is endangering us. I worry about the direction we're heading in as a country. And I think a lot of Americans would agree with that, including Fox viewers and MSNBC viewers and CNN viewers and, of course, C-SPAN viewers who care the most of all.
I'd be interested to hear your opinion about the current White House press briefings, the questions that the press is asking, the responses they're receiving, the spokespeople, and how those compare with previous administrations.
Yeah, it's a whole new world. I mean, how many of you have watched the White House briefings in the term? Because it's like really entertaining, right? It's like, it's much more theatrical. When I first started covering the White House, they weren't televised, and believe me, no one would have wanted to see them. Now they're carried live. They are more adversarial than they've been in the past. And it's hard to be a press secretary for Donald Trump because Donald Trump has the Trump broadcasting system, which is his Twitter feed, and he can broadcast anytime he wants, whatever it is he's thinking. And there have been many times when it has not been what his spokesperson just came out and told the reporters. So this creates a special dilemma both for the spokesperson and for the reporters covering it. Although I got to say, I love the fact that President Trump is on social media. I mean, I like the fact that we have a sense of what he's thinking and what he's feeling and what's on his mind. And I think that is a valuable thing that future presidents ought to learn from. And during the campaign, Donald Trump as a candidate was very available to reporters, more so than Hillary Clinton was. He did interviews, he did news conferences almost every day. I've been disappointed that he hasn't done that as president because I think that is really valuable. I thought it was valuable for him, and it was definitely valuable for us.
Mics are open. Why don't people seem to care about $21 trillion in debt? Both parties don't seem to care, the public doesn't seem to care, and does it matter?
I think it's always been easier to sell tax cuts than to sell fiscal discipline. I know that's a revelation for you.
Very good.
I think people are going to care when we have a downturn, which eventually we will, and we've got this huge debt that will limit our ability to respond to the next economic crisis. But why do people like Christmas more than going to the dentist? That would be.
What is your experience in USA Today? You must know what kind of stories that people will read all the time.
Well, we definitely know that now because most of our readership's online. We not only know what stories readers want to read most, we know how long they spend reading the story, and through the metric devices that we have available, we can tell where you stop reading the story. And if you people would start reading my stories to the end, you would find them extremely interesting. This has created some challenges for journalists, right? Because you could devise a newspaper full of things that everybody wanted to click on, but it would not be the most substantive journalism diet that you have. So we do stories that we know will do well, but we do stories we know will not do well too because we think they're important to do.
How, excuse me, what's the mix of revenue coming in from online and from the hard copy newspaper at USA Today?
I have not the slightest idea. Yeah.
And don't care?
Not really my table here, you know.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this then. Will USA Today survive the next 10 years?
As a news organization, absolutely.
As a newspaper?
Above my pay grade.
Will you survive the next 10 years? Yes, sir.
If I keep falling off stairs at C-SPAN radio, no, I may not survive.
Did I get that picture?
I could have broken my head.
Go ahead. This gentleman will, and I'll take a picture there.
Okay.
Yeah. Wow.
You're really big on Twitter, aren't you? You and Donald Trump?
Not at all. Yes.
You described having, excuse me, the unique vantage point of looking back over 30 years, back at the Reagan administration. Obviously, every presidency seeks to come along and significantly undo, if it's from the other party, what the previous president has done. What do you think 30 years from now you'll be noticing about the lasting impact of the Trump presidency?
Good question.
That's a great question. And of course, it's hard to know at the time it's going on, right? But I do think that this has been a really challenging time for the country. I think we're watching, we're all watching the special counsel's investigation. That's going to be important too. If I was thinking about let's hope 30 years from now I'm still looking back. But if I were looking back, one thing I really want to know from the person who is 30 years older than me, that's not what I mean, 30 years, you know what I mean, is what's happened with the Russia meddling in our election. Was this something that we got hold of and pushed back on, or is this going to be a problem that gets worse and worse? And what does that do to talk about undermining trust in our democracy if we don't trust the vote count? So that's something I think it's really important for us to cover and to understand and to pursue.
Sir.
I want to thank you both for the enlightening conversation and for your service. And in the spirit of having conversations, I wonder if you might, both of you, offer advice for bridging the gaps that exist between different tribes, different people with different political philosophies in our everyday lives. We focus so much on the national conversation, on conversations about, with which we can't interact, but I wondered if you have some advice for how we might foster better conversations within our own communities.
I'll answer if you'll answer.
No, it's your show.
If you're not gonna answer, why should I answer? That doesn't seem fair.
Because if you don't answer, this is over.
Yeah. So, we have this big Thanksgiving dinner with my family. And we have this, in 2016, we had people who had voted for Donald Trump, and we had people who had voted for Jill Stein. So we had Hillary Clinton voters and we had Bernie Sanders voters. We have a very complicated and diverse family. And one of the things that I think is important to try to do is to actually talk and actually listen to each other, because we actually don't have any problem talking. It's the listening part that we don't always do. And sometimes it's easier not to talk or to listen because it's enraging, and then the tears are, and then people throw water, and it's like, but I think if all of us tried to talk and listen more to people who disagree with us, this would be a good start. And you could start, I don't know about your family, my family is full of all kinds of people. That has been a place I've tried to start. Now, Brian is going to give his advice. Brian?
I have another question for you. You know, one of the things that we've found out since Robert Browning here at Purdue had developed the archive that C-SPAN now has, is that if a politician stands up today and says something, you can go back, anybody in the room can do this, you can go back 10 years and find out that they were completely on the other side. What should we think? I mean, I hear this all the time in talk show hosts who were railing against Barack Obama for things, and now the same things that he was doing, if Donald Trump's doing, it's fine now. What advice would you have for people when I know a lot of people in this room are very partisan, but if they really want to get to the bottom of all this, what should we believe? I mean, it's not just the news media that would come up with this kind of a poll.
Well, it's important, it's important to try to be as unhypocritical as possible, so that if you hated Barack Obama for something and now Donald Trump is doing it, maybe you should either criticize Donald Trump for it or rethink what you thought about Barack Obama. But I have two things to say, since you didn't refuse to answer my question.
Yes.
And the first is that I hope that we all realize what a contribution Brian Lamb has made we talk about democracy tonight, what a contribution Brian Lamb has made to our democracy. And I'm actually not done yet. Because I remember, when did C-SPAN start?
79.
Okay, so I thought I remembered you lobbying for it, but it already started by the time I got to town. So
yeah.
Anyway, but Brian Lamb started, it was like Brian Lamb's thing. Like, it was not something that was, like, people thought it was crazy. Who would want to watch Congress? Congress will never agree. Am I right?
Still
yeah.
think
How do you
that.
pay for it? Yeah, exactly. And it was Brian Lamb as an individual person who brought about C-SPAN. And C-SPAN has changed our democracy in big ways. It means it's possible to watch everything in the House and eventually stuff in the Senate and committee hearings. And it's now we've got this incredible archive where you can go back and see all the hairstyles I've had for the past 30 years. And it's made our government more transparent. And individuals make a big difference. And Brian Lamb has made a big difference. So now we should applaud.
Mary Fran Mattson, who is the head of the comm school, and Dean Reingold is the dean of the liberal arts school, and Robert Browning and others have come together to create this center here for scholarship and engagement. But I want to introduce to you Connie Debley, because Connie is back there taking pictures right now. Connie, please come up to the microphone, because we're about to shut this down.
Oh, I have one more thing to say.
No.
It's really good.
No.
It's not about you.
Good.
I promise it's not about you.
We'll get back to that.
Okay, right.
Connie is the managing director of this new center, and she spent 25 years with us, and she has done everything in television and is tremendous at it. Give us just quickly your plan for the students and the scholarship and the professors and all that with the center.
It's to get this 237,000 hours, it's up now, 237,000 hours of video into the classrooms at Purdue, across the country. It's to help professors use the archives in their research, which is really, really important. It's to bring people like Susan Page to Purdue so that these students who had a wonderful time talking to you out here, Brett, I loved watching this. And it's to we're the next step of C-SPAN. I really believe that. You know, C-SPAN is going to continue for years and years and years, but this archives, there's nothing like it, and it's the only place. So you can go home, turn on your computer, go to cspan.org, put in a name of a congressman or an event, and the video pops up. That's pretty amazing. So that's kind of what we're going to do.
And, well, for instance, we just had 3,000 entries for the student cam contest for kids, and what these kids did in the middle schools and high schools in their 5 to 7 minute documentaries is just incredible. It's thank you very much, Connie.
So can I say my other thing?
I do want the world to know that Connie's from Hanover, Kansas, and you're from Wichita, Kansas?
Right?
What is it about the Midwestern?
I mean
she's
it's the Heartland stuff, huh?
University of Kansas, Northwestern University? Anyway, yeah, I'm sorry. I did it. Whoa. I keep trying.
Bad.
Yes.
That's bad.
Now, what else do you want to say?
So I just have one more thing to say, and that is that Connie picked me up at the Indianapolis airport this afternoon, and we were driving back here, and I said, what if no one shows up? And she agreed this was a possibility. And I would just like to say that you had tornadoes yesterday, and it was snowing as we were driving here, and I understand there are locusts on the forecast for tomorrow. So I just want to thank you all for showing up and being such a great audience. Thank you.
And I want to thank everybody for coming also. This has been a tremendous crowd. Thank you for being here and your questions. And the night is over. I'm going to sell this.